Well, hello. I'm here with Doug to talk about spam and other things, and the Stanford Internet Observatory, which I'd like to learn more about. It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. So why don't you start, Doug? Make sense of this. I never quite understood the Stanford Internet Observatory.
Okay. So the Stanford Internet Observatory has been around for about 4 or 5 years, and they kind of stemmed out of another organization. And what they're trying to do is determine if there's been election fraud, if there are outside influences in our elections. And I'm kind of combining, they're different organizations, but I'm kind of combining what these different organizations have done. Now, there are some people that are very hostile against it, and I'm still learning about this, but there's Michael Schellenberg and Matt Taibbi. Did I say that right? Are you
Yeah,
familiar with who he is? Okay.
I've heard the name, but I have trouble
Okay.
keeping them straight. I know
Yeah.
basically the whole Republican Party is dead set against this, of course, because it's all about Trump's claims about election fraud, essentially, right?
Yeah, well, election fraud and more specifically freedom of information.
Right.
Trump is apparently suing over election fraud, misinformation. So the way I got involved in this is that one of the key players, a woman by the name of Renee DeRista, was at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco giving a talk, and that was last week. And I just looked today, if you go to uh, the Free Press, which I believe is a Stanford publication, there's a woman today who wrote an article called My First Job at the Stanford Internet Observatory. So this is a complex topic, but what this comes down to is if you go to Michael Schellenberger's webpage, he announces victory over, we now have free speech in our country. Or I'm kind of not direct quote, but he's claiming we have now free victory of freedom of speech. And his claim is that we have victory because we've effectively shut down Renee DeRista and other people at the Stanford Internet Observatory. So you got to explain that logic to me, Sam. How do you have freedom of speech by shutting down an organization that's speaking out? It's kind of contradictory, is not?
No, no. Freedom of speech means freedom to lie politically and to have no government agency say anything negative about it. That's their point. And of course, Stanford is probably working with government money, I suppose. I mean,
Well, yeah,
that's why they call this weaponization of the government. You know, like most of the Republican claims, it's not 100% insane. I mean, Biden was going to have a ministry of truth to help for the government to tell social media what was true and what was false, and they said you can't be doing that, and they're probably right.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's essentially what this is. I mean, that's the issue. That's why Elon Musk marks all these things government-sponsored media. It's it's a question of how deeply you mistrust everything the government does. And the Republicans very much mistrust everything the government does, and Democrats not so much.
yeah. Interesting, huh? So,
Yeah.
you know, what's kind of sad about this is they've been doing a lot of work. The
Yeah.
claim is that they were telling social media how to, what messages
Right.
not to propagate along those lines.
I know. And it peaked, I think, with Hunter Biden's laptop, which the New York Post put out. And I remember all the mainstream media said the government has determined that this is Russian disinformation, and it turned out not to be.
Yeah, yeah. And the claim is that the Stanford Internet Observatory is running a botnet, and this botnet is
But
spewing out false and incorrect information. However, that's the claim.
wow.
That's the claim by
Well, that would be
Schellenberger.
bad if they're actually doing that. That would be what they're supposed to be stopping.
Right, exactly. And if you listen to the talk from Renee DeRista, what she was saying is that we knew we're getting requests from government agencies, okay, which were subject to FOIA requests.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, we knew that. Why don't we just publish all this information, make it publicly available anytime a request comes in to show everybody, what we're communicating. And she claims that in the 60,000 emails or so, that no one has been able to find anywhere where they've sent out one email saying, we recommend, or we're telling you to block or disable an account, something along those lines.
Yeah. So what exactly
So,
did they do? Did they just publish like a blog full of facts about disinformation on the web for people to read, or what?
yeah, so what they did is, again, I haven't looked into this in great detail,
Yeah.
but there's a part of this that's pretty troubling, actually, that I haven't gotten to yet. But I believe what they were doing is kind of rating the truthfulness of
Right.
claims that were being made.
Like a
They
lot of
did,
things. The Google News does that. The
yes,
Washington
yeah,
Post does that.
yeah, yeah. And what they did is they used student interns who were part of it, however they were doing the rating. And again, I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not, yeah, so I'm still investigating that. But what happened is there was a lot of mis and disinformation that eventually made its way to Congress. And they started doing some investigation with the GOP, requesting information. And what's kind of ironic about it is the GOP was duped into this in saying that we need all of your emails. And they said, look, we've provided them. And they said, no, 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 we need the emails that go back 3 or 4 years that you didn't provide to us. And the Stanford Internet Observatory said, well, we didn't exist. And they said, well, Schellenberger said you did, and Taibbi, these
Yeah.
other people did. So, you know,
Yeah.
but here's what the sad part is, that there was a request, and it's kind of interesting. It gets a little tricky, so I'm going to try and explain this, and hopefully I'll do a good job. But what happened was there was a request for information, which included emails from students, and so students' names and email addresses.
Hmm.
Okay, whoops, I think I just bumped it.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so that information, Durista said, we can't share that, and we need to redact that. And Stanford lawyers said, they went back and forth in this, and they said, no, 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 you're being too cautious. We're going to release this anyway. And as soon as they did, the students were all under attack.
Yeah, of course. I mean, gee,
Yeah.
I thought FERPA would mean you can't share students' information. Yeah. And also just
Yeah.
good common sense in the modern climate. I mean, anybody who takes a position that Donald Trump or the Republicans don't like will immediately get flooded with death threats.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting how this has become weaponized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she has a book there that she's written that's actually, I haven't read it, I just learned about it.
Yeah.
I believe, oops, I don't have that in there. Oh, I believe it's called Invisible Rulers. And it's essentially how people behind the scenes have gotten a small group or a small army together, is what people on the Trump side, I think, were called, was Trump's army.
Mm-hmm.
Small number of people to produce a lot of information that becomes circular information, where somebody states it and then somebody in Congress references that, and then all of a sudden it becomes a fact.
Right. We talked about this before. This is
Yeah.
the ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, the ecosystem. One thing that she did bring up in her research, it was pretty interesting, is just going back 100 years and talking about mis and disinformation and marketing. And she said, if you go back to the mid 1920s, women were getting their freedoms, right? They were getting some rights. The Victorian era had kind of come to an end, and you had women wearing shorter dresses, the flappers, the haircut was different,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the one thing that they wanted to do, or the cigarette companies wanted to do, was sell cigarettes to women. And how would you do that?
Right.
And they called them, I'd never heard of this before, but they called them freedom torches, the cigarettes.
Yeah.
And so there was a big push that was highly successful. Because if you go back in that flapper era, you see women smoking cigarettes,
Oh, and
which I don't,
I think that was
yeah,
a real rebellious move back then. They didn't think of it as health risk. They thought of like wearing pants, showing off that you could do what men did.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'll just kind of add to this a little trivia that I learned about San Francisco is San Francisco never had public toilets.
Oh.
And we're talking Victorian era. And eventually they installed what were called comfort stations. And these were places for men to visit for comfort, but women were not allowed. And the reason for that is that way they'd have to stay at home. And if you go to Golden Gate Park and I think the San Francisco Zoo, there are comfort stations specifically for women and children. They're women and children facilities for diaper changing and for women to go to the bathroom.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you look at some of the old buildings in San Francisco that were once restrooms or created for restrooms. They were for men only. How's that? So,
Yeah. It makes
kind of
sense.
the era, things have changed. Anyway, we'll hear more on this. The As of today, the Stanford Internet Observatory has not been shut down, but they've terminated the contract of Alex Stamos
Yeah.
and Renee DeRista. And the thing is, they've got more information that they're going to be releasing.
Yeah. I mean, what I've heard is that they just got so many lawsuits, it was just too expensive to run. And I kind of wonder if it's even necessary. Like we say, other people are flagging disinformation here and there. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it
So
might
I'm
take you more
sure they'll
trouble than.
both do well and move on.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Alex is fine. I don't know about the
yeah,
other
yeah,
person. Yeah.
yeah.
He's got a lot of things to do.
All right, Sam, what's your first story? So, I
Yeah.
want to follow this. I might have a little bit more for us on Friday.
Yeah.
What's
That'd
your
be
next
good.
story?
Well,
What do you got?
I got a lot of little things. One I was surprised. There's a report from Barracuda saying 92% of companies say that somebody succeeded in impersonating, getting credential compromised through spam last year. So I didn't know it was that bad. 92% of them say they did have someone uh, click on a spam link and therefore run code or something with their credentials. That number
Sam,
seems hard to believe.
yeah, yeah, hard to believe for
I
me
checked and say
too.
they really do claim this, but I wonder exactly what it means. Anyway, that's an outrageous number.
So, Sam, I think what this means is some companies like, and I think it's a service that Barracuda offers,
Yeah.
which is fake spam
Oh, well.
messages.
Oh, well. Now they say they were hit by credential compromise, so it doesn't mean they didn't just click on a fake one, I think.
No, no, no. Hold on.
Yeah.
That they use for training sessions.
Yeah.
And so they'll send out fake emails to
Right.
see if employees will click. It's a
I know nobody
training.
before does that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering where they're getting their statistics.
I think it's a survey, they say, but yeah, I'd like to know more.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Okay.
love these numbers. That if it's really that bad, that's crazy. Anyway, and
But
another.
if it is that bad, it's wonderful for marketing.
Well, yeah, that's why I think I'd like to hear more about this. And the Internet Archive lost the court case last year, and now they said they had to remove 500,000 books. Because I just read about, observed their video. The internet during the pandemic, the Internet Archive decided to digitize all the books and do controlled digital loaning with DRM. So if one person digitally checks out the book, nobody else can check it out until they're done. And they said, there, that's fair use. That's just delivering it over the internet for safety in the pandemic. And they got sued, and the judge said, no, that's making an unauthorized digital copy. You have to pay for that. You have to pay for digital rights, and they can't afford that, so they lost and they took out down all the books, 500,000 books.
Really?
They're still claiming there'd be another appeal, but they claimed that was fair use, and they lost in court, saying that is not fair use,
I
which kind of
see.
surprised me. I didn't know they'd gone to all. They said they even DRM'd the copy, so that after your 2 week loaning period, you can't open it anymore. So they tried hard to make it that they're not just a pirate site delivering unauthorized copies of the book, but apparently it still did not succeed.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
And there's one more in this sort of legal area might be worth mentioning. Apple Intelligence, is coming, but not to
right?
Europe, only to America, because Europe has all these privacy laws. And they just made the law that Apple has to distribute things through have to let people download things from other shops, and they're getting sued over that again. So, I mean, they say Tim's terrified of watchdogs, is what this headline says. I think it's a fair statement. If I was running Apple, I'd do the same thing. I'd say, the legality of all our products are currently in contention in Europe. And so
Yeah,
we really better not roll out anything new and controversial until we understand what's allowed over there. Anyway,
yeah, yeah. Interesting, huh?
yeah,
All right. So let's come back to the United States here. And let's talk about, have you heard of zombie mortgages?
never until I saw this.
Yeah. So apparently, this is becoming a pretty big thing. So let's say you go back to 2008, you maybe had a second mortgage taken out in your house. The mortgage industry, the real estate industry collapsed, and you couldn't afford the payments. Maybe you hired a lawyer, the lawyer negotiated with you, or a third party company to renegotiate the loans, and the loans were written off by the lender. Okay.
Yeah, well, that last step is the hard part. Yeah.
Well, they did. They wrote off a lot of loans. People couldn't afford it, and so you know
Well, yeah.
what's it? Yeah. So the loans were written off. So that's nearly 20 years ago. Okay. Today, and so what did the banks do with those loans? Some of them they just kind of left on the vine, so to speak. But what's important is that people were no longer getting payments, and they weren't being threatened of a lawsuit. No threats were there.
Yeah.
So some of the banks held on to those loans. Other banks sold them to credit houses, credit bureaus to try and collect on them, collection agencies.
Yeah.
So they sold the loan to somebody else. Okay. 20 years goes by. Wake up in the morning, you go outside, and this is actually what's happening. And people are finding auctions taking place on the front steps or in the driveway of their house where the house is being sold. And they're saying, what the heck is going on here? And they said, oh, you're delinquent in your loan from 20 years ago. And we're now collecting, or we've now gone through court proceedings. We now own the house and it's up for auction.
Well, to be fair, what I saw is at
Yes.
least they'd been receiving demands for payment and ignoring them, thinking they were just spam.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
like they didn't even get any clue.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that's the case in every case in all of these, because again,
Also,
this is a generalization.
also, I thought when a bank wrote off a loan, that was actually a clearly defined thing, and they would then not pay taxes. It would be written down as a loss, and then you couldn't revive it later. That's the part that interests me. I mean, did they really forgive it or not?
Well, according to the attorney who's got
Yeah.
stories on this, reports from people, it's unclear. How's that?
Right, right. That's the
And
thing. Yeah.
yeah, and if you sell a loan off, if the bank sells it to a collection agency,
Then they haven't forgiven it at all. They're still exploiting it for what value it has.
yeah. And the other thing is legally now, I don't know, this is contract law, and I'm not a lawyer, you're not either, but it's my understanding that a written contract is only valid for 4 years.
Oh, I never heard that.
Yeah, or maybe this is state of California.
But I would think what's real important is exactly what did it mean when they wrote off the loan? Was that a document in paper that went to you? Or did they just say, "Oh, we won't worry about that verbally" or something? That's the question.
Yeah,
When they
so
write off the second mortgage, how formal was that? Apparently not formal enough.
well, it was formal enough that people stopped receiving payment requests.
Right, but they can just say, "We have chosen not to bill you for a period." That's a whole different issue than saying we've forgiven the loan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But again, housing prices have increased.
Yeah.
Now banks and people of the collection agencies are seizing homes, and people are not responding to the requests for money, thinking it's spam, and they're losing their houses.
Yeah. I
And I
remember
don't
those.
know that they have any recourse. I know for back taxes non-payment, there's a recourse where if somebody buys the house, depending on the state. So if somebody buys a house or a piece of property for non-payment of taxes, there is a period of time in some states where somebody can make good on those taxes. The person that bought the house no longer owns it. They get their money back, and
Mhm.
everyone is made whole again. But the speculation of buying the house or getting the house is gone.
Man. Yeah. Sounds pretty
So
awful. Those people need to hire lawyers, obviously.
yeah, exactly. All
Yeah.
right, you got another one for us, Sam.
Yeah, I got another bunch of little ones. There's a new UEFI vulnerability in the Phoenix BIOS, or maybe whatever they call it these days, no longer a BIOS,
Yeah,
UEFI firmware,
you
which means you can make bootkits to infect a whole bunch of Lenovo and other computers. And some of them have updates, some of them don't. But this is something I hear an awful about on Pulse Security podcast. There, the secure boot process is pretty vulnerable and pretty flaky. It's a problem. The intention of it is to stop rootkits and bootkits, but there are flaws. And here they found a simple buffer overflow in the
oh
Phoenix
no.
one. Well, anything can go wrong. It will go wrong. You're running a whole bunch of code early in the boot process with high privileges, and there is no way to verify the signature of it or anything apparently. And so there are vulnerabilities.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. And there's another one which I was quite interested in. We've had radiation therapy for cancer for a long time, but now they've developed drugs that attach to the cancer cells, and they attach a little radioactive particle to the drug so it kills the cells sort of one by one with the medicine, which is what you would optimally want, right? That's essentially what your immune system does. And so it only works for a couple of rare kinds of cancer now, one rare kind of prostate cancer and something else, but it's another great step forward. Targeted tiny little radioactive particles that just kill the cancer cells without killing so many healthy cells.
Yeah, interesting. So what happens is, just to get a little technical,
Yeah,
um, they they attack the radioactive particles, I'll call it that,
yeah,
to a protein that has a binding site that binds specifically to the cancer cell. Something like
yes,
that.
yes, something like that. It's AstraZeneca has joined them as the big companies doing this. They call it targeted radiopharmaceuticals with molecular precision. So I'm not quite sure exactly what the chemicals are they're putting in, but they have a few radioactive atoms in that, and that's going to kill the. And they're talking about different types of radiation, how they've been using beta rays, but they're trying to get down to alpha rays, which would be even shorter range.
Yeah. So
And that's the
yeah,
idea. So they
yeah.
killed
So
just a tiny. It's just basically like super targeted surgery. Kill just this one and this one and this one.
that's interesting. It's kind of
Yeah,
like bots, right?
yeah, or like drones.
Nanobots, yeah, or
Yeah, yeah,
drones, yeah.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so they're currently using beta
I
radiation.
think they said something about that. Yeah. Then they'll move. Let me get the alpha.
Hmm,
Maybe not. I'm not finding it on this one. Sorry. But anyway, yeah.
okay.
Anyway, there's another one where on a different topic I thought was interesting. A company called Optus, an Australian telco, had an interesting flaw. What they did was they had an API, and one part of the API, they updated something and it broke the authentication for one of the API requests. So you could execute it without authentication. That kind of thing happens all the time. But then they had a beta version of their site up and the final version of their API up, and they forgot about the beta version. So when they patched this flaw, they never patched the old version. It was still live, which is another thing that very often happens. And that was up there for years, and people could execute, gain code execution through it. Just this happens all the time. When people have API endpoints, they frequently forget to enforce authentication on them all.
Yeah,
And people often leave old versions of junk on their network in many levels. One thing that happens, for example, at colleges all the time is somebody sets up like a server, and then that teacher is teaching another class or retires or something, and the server is just sitting on the network, not updated, vulnerable for years, and nobody knows who's responsible for this. Is somebody still using it?
yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
thing keeps happening. So anyway, that's all I got.
Okay.
Yeah, but I
Well,
thought it was
that's it
interesting
for
stuff.
me.
Yeah. All right.
You can Continue on Friday?
Yep, we'll have another one of these on Friday in the afternoon.
Sounds good.
All right.